begin, I would start the recording. And then I'll stop the transcription. Okay, so now the recording is on. The next thing is to know if my voice is audible enough. So can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, please.
Okay, that's great. With the recording on, now we begin. Anyone coming after this and misses too much would have to watch the recording. In our last class, we were discussing types of discourse and also types of disagreements. And we saw the distinction between verbal and substantive disagreements. Today, we're going to look at the distinction between the normative and the empirical. Now, the normative is about values, and the empirical is about facts. So in this session, we'll round up our analysis of the difference between values and facts. Now, you will recall that values are about what we should or should not do, and facts are about what is or is not. Sometimes we mistake values for facts. Yeah, so sometimes. And in fact, there are factual statements with implicit value judgments. Examples. Look at the difference between the following two statements. The president has lifted the lockdown, and then the president has rightly lifted the lockdown. If you look at the two of them, the difference is that the second has a word rightly inserted somewhere. Now, the first is a factual statement. The second is like the first, but with an implicit value judgment represented by the word rightly. So the second is a value judgment. Now, you need to look out for both the explicit and implicit meanings of statements. Without confirming these two kinds of meanings, you could be misled. And so you could see how important this distinction is to our business of thinking critically. Now let's look at metaphors and proverbs. Critical to logical reasoning is the need to single out expressions that should not be interpreted literally. Now, logical reasoning depends on literal interpretation. If we are going to work with statements at a logical level, those statements have to have accurate literal interpretation. So any statement that does not have accurate literal interpretation cannot be used in a logical analysis. So the first thing we need to do as logicians is to first of all single out those kinds of statements that we don't interpret literally so that we can set them aside as logicians. And so when we see such statements, we know that they are really not for our analysis as logicians. Now, two of such kinds of expressions are metaphors and proverbs. So we need to know what they are in order to know how to handle them as logicians. Let's begin with metaphors. These are sentences that should not be interpreted literally. Shouldn't be interpreted literally. Examples: don't judge a book by its cover. It means don't evaluate things just by looking at their appearances. And then the second example, it's raining cats and dogs. Raining cats and dogs. It means it's raining heavily. Of course, you don't expect cats and dogs to fall down from the sky. So these are examples of metaphors. And then proverb. Proverb is a sentence with a literal meaning as well as a non-literal one. So a proverb has both a literal and non-literal meaning. So it has two meanings, a literal one and a non-literal one. And then the non-literal meaning is usually a piece of advice. So that means a proverb is a multiple purpose speech act. Multiple purpose. Examples. Only a fool tests the depth of a river with two of his feet. So it means don't embark on a venture without a proper reflection. That's a non-literal meaning. Now it has a literal meaning. The literal meaning, of course, is don't step into a river if you don't know the depth with two of your feet. And then a non-literal, don't step into a business that you have not researched properly. And then another example, it takes a whole village to raise a child, which is literally true. And then the non-literal meaning, the community is responsible for the moral upbringing of a child. The third example, no one can lick his or her own elbow. Of course, that is true for most of us, except for extreme circles or magic workers. So there are certain people who can probably succeed in doing that, but that would be the result of an extreme skill. So the non-literal meaning is no person is an island. You need the assistance of other people in your life. So proverbs have both literal and non-literal meanings. The intentions behind proverbs. Proverbs are usually used to advise people. But sometimes proverbs are not always sincerely used. For instance, a proverb, no one can lick his or her own elbow, can be used to encourage corruption or convince one that it is impossible to fight corruption. Now, a little exercise. Provide one example each of a metaphor and a proverb. So you can do that at your spare time. You can quickly do that, in your mind. And then second, how is a metaphor different from a proverb? So we have said that metaphors are sentences that shouldn't be interpreted literally, but proverbs are sentences that have both literal and non-literal interpretations. So the difference of a proverb is that it has both literal and non-literal meanings. But a metaphor has only a non-literal meaning. So that's the difference between the two. Okay. Now let's move on to certain meaning defects in language. In addition to metaphors and proverbs, there are also some other expressions whose meanings are defective. Now, two examples of defective meaning in expressions are vagueness and ambiguity. So vague expressions have defective meanings. Ambiguous expressions also have defective meanings. Let's look at vagueness. An expression is vague when its meaning has no boundaries of application. No boundaries of application. So an expression is vague when its meaning is not precise. Examples. She'll be here any moment from now. So any moment from now is a phrase that has no boundary of application. You just don't know where to apply it. And so it extends into the eternal or unlimited future. Now, I'll come to see your parents at the right time. I'll come to see your parents at the right time. So at the right time, the phrase at the right time has no boundary of application. You just don't know where to sit with that phrase. You can't give it a time frame or a time lag or a time tag. That car is expensive. That car is expensive. Now, expensive has no boundary of application. Is it $100,000? Is it $1,000,000? Is it $100 million? Is it $1 trillion? So expensive, is a bit vague. All it tells you is that, well, this car is, needs quite a lot of money. Ambiguity. A sentence is ambiguous when it is capable of more than one meaning. So if a sentence is capable of more than one meaning, then it is ambiguous. Now, ambiguity, an ambiguous sentence definitely has a clear meaning. The meaning is clear, but it is not just one meaning. It could be two or more. So the problem with with ambiguity is not precision. The problem is not precision. The precision is there, the clarity is there, but there could be two or more competing and even precise meanings. So that's the difference between ambiguity and vagueness. In the case of vagueness, there is no precision. No precision, but there is precision in ambiguity. Now, there's precision, but there's multiplicity of meanings in ambiguity. There are three types of ambiguity. You have lexical, referential, and syntactic. Now, let's begin with the lexical. Lexical ambiguity. If an ambiguity occurs in a single word, then it is called lexical ambiguity. So that's the ambiguity that arises from just a word. Now, this type of ambiguity usually occurs in words that have the same spelling but different meanings. Such words are called homographs. So ambiguous words are called homographs. Examples. He lives close to the bank. Does he live close to a riverbank or a bank as a financial institution? Then another example, military head 6 arms. Now, are we referring to the head of a military man, as in the biological head of a military man, or the head of a military as an institution? Are we also talking about the biological arms of a military man, or are we talking about weapons? And also, that sentence or phrase contains two homographs or two ambiguous words. And then other homographs include race, chest, light. So there are certain words that are natural homographs. You have to, it is when you use them in a sentence that we know which particular meaning you are. If, for instance, I say that Peter comes from, Peter is of the African race. Peter is of the African race. Then I would know I'm talking about race as in terms of color of the skin. But if I say that Peter and Paul are in the race to find the fastest cure to COVID-19, then I'll know I'm talking about race as a competition, a competition. So it is only when you have put these kinds of words in a sentence that its meaning becomes clear. Otherwise, when you look at it on its own, you don't really know which meaning because it has multiple meanings. So such natural homographs include race, chest, light, and some others. Then we have referential ambiguity. Now, this type of ambiguity occurs when a phrase or a word in a particular context could refer to two more properties of things in a sentence. Now, referential ambiguity occurs from the use of pronouns and quantifiers. So referential applies mostly to pronouns. Examples. The boy told his father about the theft case and he was very upset. The boy told his father about the theft case and he was very upset. Now, who is upset? the boy or the father. So the pronoun he does not specify which of the nouns in the sentence it's referring to. Another example, he used deceit to sell the soap to me, but I did not buy it. He used deceit to sell the soap to me, but I did not buy it. Now, what did I not buy? The deceit or the soap? So here too, the pronoun it fails to specify which noun it's referring to. So these are examples of referential ambiguity. Then you have the syntactic or sentential ambiguity. When a sentence contains two or more possible meanings, a sentence contains two or more possible meanings, then the sentence is ambiguous. Now, syntactic or sentential ambiguity occurs when it is clear what the individual words in the sentence mean, but it's not clear what the whole sentence means. So in the case of the syntactic or sentential ambiguity, the individual words in the sentences have clear meanings, but when put together into the sentence itself is ambiguous. Examples. Today we shall be discussing violence on TV. Today we shall be discussing violence on TV. Now, there are two possible meanings. Is it that discussion of violence will be held on the TV program, or that violence on TV will be the topic of discussion? Then we have another example. The dean will talk about cheating in the seminar room. The dean will talk about cheating in the seminar room. Now, is the dean going to talk about cheating that happened in the seminar room, or is cheating the topic of the lecture she's going to deliver in the seminar room? So these are examples of sentential ambiguity. Now, these three kinds of ambiguity are not in your critical thinking textbook. I got them from some other textbook that's available at the bookshop. That one is it's colored red and black, So, but I brought it because I think it will help you to be more efficient in identifying ambiguity. If you know the three types, you will immediately know how to identify these ambiguities, especially the single-worded ambiguity, the homographs. But apart from the homographs, you will also know other kinds of ambiguities if they come around. So it's very essential you knew the three types, even though they are not in your curriculum this semester. Now let's move on. Difference between vagueness and ambiguity. Now, a vague term does not indicate a clear boundary of applying the meaning of the term. So a vague term is not precise. But on the other hand, an ambiguous term gives us ideas of what it means, but suggests more than one accepted meaning. So a vague term is not precise. Precision is a problem with vagueness. But an ambiguous term is precise. Now, precision is not a problem with ambiguity. The problem with ambiguity is multiplicity of meanings. So you could have 2 or 3 precise meanings, So that's the problem. Just remember that precision is the problem with vagueness, and then multiplicity is the problem with ambiguity. All right. So vagueness means no clear meaning. Ambiguity means more than one accepted meaning. The role of vagueness and ambiguity in language. So vagueness and ambiguity can facilitate equivocation and disagreement in language. The role of vagueness and ambiguity can also be found in metaphors and proverbs. So when you look at metaphors and also proverbs, you'll see the roles of vagueness and ambiguity. Okay, now let's look at equivocation. Equivocation occurs when someone shifts unannounced from one meaning of a word to another meaning of the same word in the same passage. This is usually done with the hope of confusing the reader. Now, sometimes you look at a passage and you see a particular word is being repeated, usually a homograph. That's a word that is capable of having more than one meaning. And then, but the way it is used shows that the person who used it with one particular meaning in one instance, and then uses it for another meaning in another instance. And it is not just that, but what makes it a problem is that the person does it with the intention of deceiving you into thinking that they have the same meaning, But when they are generating different meanings that are confusing you and persuading you to accept his or her argument. Now, equivocation is to take advantage of ambiguity, because equivocation means taking advantage of the ambiguous nature of words to persuade or confuse readers. Now, so we shall study equivocation as a form of argument later on in one of the subsequent weeks. But let's look at some examples of equivocation. Now, the examples I'm going to show now are non-argumentative examples. Non-argumentative examples. So they are not really examples of equivocation in argument. Now let's look at this. Examples. Time flies like an arrow and fruit flies like a banana. Time flies like an arrow and fruit flies like a banana. Now the first flies is a verb meaning moving in the air. Then the second flies is not a verb, it's actually a noun indicating fruit insects. Fruit flies are certain types of insects, So it's a noun indicating fruit insects. So that's the first equivocation. Then the second one, there's another equivocation. The first like is used for the purpose of comparison. Time flies like an arrow. So it's comparing the way time flies to the way an arrow flies. But the second like is used as a verb indicating a preference for something. So fruit flies like a banana. Now, the like is not a comparison. It is like in terms of preferring something. Fruit flies like a banana. So fruit flies have a desire for bananas. So both the word flies and the word like were used with multiple meanings. And if you're not careful, you would miss the multiple meanings. Now, a simpler one. I'm celebrating my birthday in a gay manner because I'm gay. I'm celebrating my birthday in a gay manner because I'm gay. Now, the first use of gay means happiness, and the second one means the state of being homosexual. So, these are equivocations, examples of non-argumentative equivocation. Strategy for identifying equivocation. Now, first of all, so how do we identify equivocation in a passage? First of all, ascertain whether a word has been used more than once in the sentence or passage. So look out for words that have appeared more than once. If you identify them, then proceed to check if the word or expression has different meanings in the sentence or passage. So once you've identified any words that have been used more than once, the next step is to ask yourself if they have different meanings. If you're able to make these two observations, then the sentence or passage contains equivocation. Importance of identifying equivocation. Note that vagueness, ambiguity, and equivocation are very important in clarifying arguments. If certain expressions are vague or ambiguous in an argument, their meaning needs to be clarified before we can even proceed to evaluate the argument. So any of these problems will prevent logical thinking. You need to clear these problems first before we can even think logically about something. Now a little exercise. Determine whether each of the following is vague or ambiguous. Determine if each of the following is vague or ambiguous. 1. We should raise tax on the rich. We should raise tax on the rich. Is it vague or is it ambiguous? So anyone who wants to answer can raise his or her hand, and then Lydia, your hand is raised. So you need to unmute yourself, unmute your microphone, and then you can make an attempt.
It's vague since it doesn't specify who the rich are. There is no specification of the use of rich, so it will be vague.
Okay, so the word rich doesn't really tell us the class of people or the extent of the portion of society that qualifies for higher taxes. Okay, so that's a good attempt. Now, I'll be back later. Joseph, you need to unmute your mic before you can speak.
Say, there is an ambiguity. There's ambiguity because it wasn't, it wasn't specific. Later, you can come at any time. Later means any moment from that time ahead. So you can come at any time. It wasn't specific.
Yeah, come in.
If it is not specific, then it is rather vague.
Vague.
It's rather vague if it's not specific.
Okay, sir.
So I'm renting a new apartment. Raymond, you can unmute yourself before you can be heard.
Yes, please. Please, it is ambiguous because we don't know if he has an apartment and he's renting it out to people, or he is going to rent an apartment.
Yes, that's a good attempt. We don't know if he's the one renting it out or he's renting it from someone.
So it's very, very exciting. Yeah.
Okay, so we don't know if he's renting from someone or he's renting to someone. So that presents a multiplicity of meanings. And so technically we call that ambiguous. Now, stolen jewel found by three. Stolen jewel found by three. Luke.
Oh.
Luke Abuga. Okay, so my network, let's say my network decreased in strength a little. So Luke, did you've not yet unmuted your mic. Is anyone else willing to answer that question? Stolen jewel found by three. Is it ambiguous or vague?
Question again.
Stolen item found by three. A stolen item is found by 3. Mario Kofi,
Sure.
do you want to?
Sir,
Yes.
yeah, it is ambiguous
Yes.
because you don't know whether the stolen jewel was found by the tree or like beside the tree, or it was a tree that found the jewel.
Yes. Yes. So it is not clear whether it was found beside the tree or whether the tree, found it as if the tree is a human being. So that's fine. Democracy is freedom for all. Democracy is freedom for all. I think we've actually seen this one before. Abigail, do you want to answer that? Then you can unmute your microphone.
Hello, sir. Please, it's vague.
Yes, it's vague, and I think we already know the reason because I used it in
It's
one of
not
my
precise.
previous classes. Now, Abigail, you would answer the next question. 2 vehicles collide, one died. 2 vehicles collide, one died.
Please, it's ambiguous.
Yes, because
Because we don't know whether it's the vehicle that we don't know which of the vehicles died. We don't know.
we don't know if it is a vehicle or a human
That
being.
died or a human being that died.
Now, number 7, court tries shooting defendant. Court tries shooting defendant. Now, I need to mention that these statements or these expressions are normally the type we see as a headline of newspapers. We normally see these kinds of expressions as news headlines. That is why they are the way they are. So when journalists are crafting the headlines, this is the way they are crafted. Now, court tries shooting defendant. Is it vague or ambiguous? Abdul, Abdul, if you want to answer, you need to unmute your mic so that you can be heard.
Yeah, please, I have a question.
Yes, is it connected with this very question? Yeah, so you can ask. Let's see if it's connected to the question.
Yes, please.
Yes. So ask your question.
Okay, so sir, please, in one of your examples that you cited, you said 2 vehicles collided and one died. So we are 2 people that joined your class, and then we are having a debate here. We know it's ambiguous, but is it referential ambiguity or syntactic ambiguity? Because I feel like the ambiguity is caused by the one there. If the one is able to modify something in the 2 vehicles, then the problem will be resolved. But he is saying that the problem is from the whole sentence. You said, please, and our question is it referential or synthetic ambiguity?
Yeah, so the preliminary question to answer is, where is the ambiguity coming from? Is it coming from any particular word? I think it is coming from the word one. So if, for instance, you replaced one with, or rather, if you say one person died, then the ambiguity disappears. So because there's no person, the one becomes ambiguous, and without person, one is a homograph. So the homograph one needed to be assisted with something more specific. All right. So if the ambiguity is coming from one word, then it's what do you call it? What's the first ambiguity? You have the referential, syntactic, and
Lexical.
And the lexical. Yes. So that's you solve these problems by asking yourself some preliminary questions. Now you need to learn what kind of questions to ask yourself. There are certain questions you need to ask yourself in order to investigate the problem. So you see, I normally ask such questions. So those preliminary questions, when you ask them, they quickly lead you to the answer. So that's how you will be solving these problems. So that's it about ambiguity and vagueness. Before we end our class, let's quickly look at law. Law is a very broad term that encompasses so many things. So we just want to look at the various senses of law, and then we end the class. So we need to understand the different ways in which we use the word law. We have about 7 senses. We have natural law, civil law, cultural norm, customary law, moral law, logical law, mathematical law. Then we have divine law. Now, the definition of law. Now, because of how large or how broad the term law is, it just has no definition, because no definition of law can satisfy all the senses at once. So we have no single definition of law. It depends on which sense of law is in question. So we treat the different senses along with their definitions. Natural laws are also called scientific laws. They refer to statements describing the regularity or uniformity in the patterns of events or properties of things in the world. So natural or scientific laws refer to the regular events of nature. That the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, this is a natural or a scientific law. That something falls to the ground, if you left it in the air and it has any weight at all, it is also a natural or scientific law. Now, we form these laws based on past experiences. If, for instance, you observe that the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west, that is a natural or scientific law. Other examples of natural law: planets revolve around the sun. The atomic weight of gold is 12. Animals survive on oxygen. Anything that has weight falls to the ground is suspended in the air. Okay, then we have civil or statutory laws. Now, civil laws are laws made by man. So these are man-made laws. And they are made to regulate human behavior. So we make laws to regulate our own behavior. And they are usually legal instruments accompanied by a sanction and backed by force. So if a student misbehaves, the person could be sent to a disciplinary committee that is headed by the dean of law, and the disciplinary committee would investigate the person's misbehavior, and then if the person is found guilty of some misbehavior, a disciplinary committee would recommend a sanction or some kind of punishment. So that's according to the laws of the University of Ghana and most other universities. Okay, so examples: commercial law, tax law, criminal law, corporate law, constitutional law, traffic law, human rights, and so on. So if you are working in a company and your boss fires or sacks you without a good reason, then you could consult a lawyer, and your lawyer will consult the labor laws. There are labor laws that govern how people are hired and fired, how people are appointed and then also terminated. I mean, people's jobs and appointments. So no one should be able to maltreat you either in commercial issues, tax issues, criminal issues, corporate issues, constitutional, traffic issues, human rights, and all that. Now, civil laws must be obeyed by all citizens. They are usually accompanied by prescribed punishment for disobedience. Then we have cultural norms, social conventions, or social rules. Common understandings. Now, cultural norms are not really laws. They are not really punishable laws, but they are common understandings about how we should do certain things, whether in traditional societies, in the case of cultural norms, or in modern societies, in the case of social conventions, and then any society, group, or organization or institution, in the case of social rules. Now, disobedience is not normally punishable, but at least it attracts social disapproval. So if, for instance, you went to a ceremony or a function in a bikini or something that makes you half naked, you might not be sent to jail, but people could frown at you and all that. So those are cultural norms or social conventions or social rules. Now, examples include how we should dress, speak, receive visitors, worship, eat, observe public holidays, attend social functions, and all that. Then you have customary law. Customary law is when a cultural norm becomes a civil law. So sometimes some cultural norms in the traditional societies are transformed into civil law. And then the government would establish some customary courts in the rural areas to administer such customary laws. So in that case, some traditional, practices or norms become customary law that you can actually punish in the customary court. So we have customary courts in rural areas. Examples of cultural norms that could become customary law include the powers of a chief, traditional marriage rights and duties. So the rights and duties in a traditional marriage could be converted from cultural norm to customary law, so that if a spouse, if a married spouse, if a spouse in a marriage is going against those things, against those duties, or abusing someone else's rights, you could take it to customary court, and then the person could be handled accordingly. Then you have moral law. Moral law, there is no universally accepted definition of moral law, but moral laws are about rules prescribing how we should or should not behave. Now, usually for a rule of behavior to be regarded as a moral law, such a rule is universally respected. So the kind of principles that become moral laws are recognized by all human beings, and there are not many of them. Examples: do not steal, do not kill, do not discriminate, do not take another person's spouse, and so on. So those principles that are moral laws are the ones that everyone recognizes, whether the person is a white person, an African, an Asian. As far as you are a human being, you know automatically that such a thing is wrong. So those are the ones that qualify as moral law. If there's a principle that is not universally accepted, it cannot be a moral law. It's just a custom somewhere, you know. Logical law. A logical law refers to rules for reasoning, you know, and the most common examples are deductive and inductive reasoning. Now we're going to do deductive reasoning in week 6 and inductive reasoning in week 7. Now, example of deductive reasoning. All men are mortal. Kofi is a man, therefore Kofi is mortal. So this is an example of deductive reasoning. Now we're going to see why we call it deductive reasoning when we discuss it in week 6. Mathematical laws. These are rules for mathematical operations. Examples: never divide by 0. Never divide by 0. Of course, if you divide by 0, you get nothing, you know, in return. All the rules of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, these are all mathematical laws. And of course, many other mathematical laws. Divine laws. Now, divine laws are laws credited with a supernatural source. You know, those laws that are believed to have supernatural sources or origins. Examples depend on the religion in question. So, for example, in Christianity, there are laws about relating with God, praying, and so on. Okay, so I think that's the end of the senses of law. Those are the senses of law, and this marks the end of the language section of the semester. The section of the semester, the first half of the semester, where we are discussing and clarifying certain language concepts that are critical to logical reasoning. In our next class, we'll start discussing arguments. And there are two kinds of arguments or reasoning. You have deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning. Next class, we deal with deductive reasoning. So before we call it a day, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand. Anyone who raised his or her hand before can bring it down so that those who want to ask questions will raise their hands. Raymond Tete, you want to ask a question? Okay. Okay, so before we end, now someone is raising his hand. Is that Solomon? Solomon, do you want to ask a question? If you do, then you need to unmute your microphone. Okay, you've brought down your hand. Now, before we go, I'm going to have to put up the recording, and then I'll end the class, or rather, I will leave the class so that I can start uploading the recording if the network permits it. So our next class is by 1:30 p.m. next week on Thursday. So until then, I wish you the best of the week and encourage you to continue to work hard as students. Bennett, do you want to ask a question? Bennett, if you want to speak, you need to unmute your microphone so that you can be heard.
Yeah, as I was saying that, please, I want the clear meaning of the vague and then the ambiguous.
The vague. Now, vagueness means lack of precision. If something is not precise, then it is vague. If you say something is expensive, It is not precise because you don't know how much, you don't know how expensive. And it doesn't tell you how expensive it is. It just tells you expensive, gives you an idea, but you have to pay a lot of money for something, but it doesn't tell you the range, whether it's $1 million or $10 or whatever, you just don't know. So something is expensive. That's a vague expression. But if you say that, if you say that if you say that a table was found by the tree, a table was found by the tree. Now that will be ambiguous. That will be ambiguous because it is either that it was found beside the tree or that the tree itself found the table. So ambiguity is is a problem of multiple meanings. It's not a problem of lack of precision. If something is ambiguous, the words could have precise meanings, but the problem is that they have more than one meaning. So the difference between vagueness and ambiguous is that vagueness is lack of precision, but ambiguous is multiplicity of meanings. And when I say
Okay.
lack of precision, I mean lack of precise meaning. So vagueness is lack of precise meaning, ambiguous is multiple meanings.
Okay. Okay, sir.
Yes, so I think that is the simplest way to distinguish between the two.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. So I'm going to have to stop the recording.
Professor,
Yes,
sir,
yes.
please concerning the assignment, should we key in our details in the box or we should just go ahead and write it down?
I don't even know how the assignments are working because I didn't set them myself. The coordinator is setting the assignments for all the groups, I think, or most of the groups. So you will have to find out from the coordinator, or probably you have to figure it out if it is something that is illegal to ask colleagues. But I think if since it doesn't require disclosing a specific answer, you can ask some colleagues so that they can tell you what it. But as I'm speaking with you, I've not even seen the assignments. All right.
Sir,
So
please, should we send it to the coordinator or we should use your name?
come again.
Sir, I'm talking about it's two assignments, so should we send it to you or the coordinator?
No, you need to send it to the coordinator because there will be nothing I will do with it. So you just have to send it to the coordinator.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm stopping the recording.